Let's read the Word of God. We're going to read about Sodom and Gomorrah. That's where we left off the other day. So we're going to continue for chapter 19. Now, I'm reading for the NLT, the New Living Translation. Amen. That evening, the two angels came to the entrance of the city of Sodom. Lot was sitting there, and when he saw them, he stood up to meet them. Then he welcomed them and bowed with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, come to my house to wash your feet and be my guests for the night. You may then get up early in the morning and be on your way again. Oh, no, they replied. We'll just spend the night out here in the city square. But Lot insisted, so at last they went home with him. Lot prepared a feast for them, complete with fresh bread made without yeast, and they ate. Now, here it's important to note something. It was Lot who baked the bread rather than his wife. This may suggest that his wife didn't really welcome the strangers into her house. Now, this is the first time that in the book of Genesis, this is the first time unleavened bread is mentioned in the Bible. One of those little facts that I like to bring up. It's the first time, unleavened bread. But it is important to note that it wasn't the wife who said, oh, let me bake some stuff for you guys. Let me make some bread. You sit down, the wife didn't seem like she really welcomed the strangers into her house. You'll find out why a little later. Let's continue. But before they retired for the night, all the men of Sodom, young and old, came from all over the city and surrounded the house. They shouted to Lot, where are the men who came to spend the night with you? Bring them out to us so we can have relations with them. So Lot stepped outside to talk to them, shutting the door behind him. Please, my brothers, he begged, don't do such a wicked thing. Look, I have two virgin daughters. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do with them as you wish. But please leave these men alone, for they are my guests and are under my protection. Now, Lot was hypocritically willing to sacrifice his own daughters to fend off the townsmen's evil vice. Now, you notice that Lot had originally pitched his tent next to Sodom in the very beginning. Now, Sodom seemed to have control of his life at this point. Now, you notice one little detail I want to show you here. That evening, two angels came to the entrance of the city of Sodom. Where was Lot? Lot was sitting right there in the entrance. What does that tell you? Lot is actually one of those people at the city gates, like a person of importance. People knew who he was, so he had slightly in increments increased his desire to be in that city. First, he was outside the city, then he went to Sodom, and now he was actually one of the prominent people in Sodom. Interesting how how things work out themselves. Okay, let's continue here. Let's see. Stand back, they shouted. This fellow came to town as an outsider, and now he's acting like our judge. We'll treat you far worse than those other men. And they lunged towards Lot to break down the door. But the two angels reached out, pulled Lot into the house, and bolted the door. Then they blinded all the men, young and old, who were at the door of the house, so they gave up trying to get inside. Meanwhile, the angels questioned Lot. Do you have any other relatives here in the city? They asked. Get them out of this place, your son-in-laws, sons, daughters, and anyone else, for we are about to destroy this city completely. The outcry against this place is so great, it has reached the Lord, and he has sent us to destroy it. So Lot rushed out to tell his daughter's fiancés, quick, get out of the city. The Lord is about to destroy it. But the young men thought he was only joking. At dawn the next morning, the angels became insistent. Hurry, they said to Lot. Take your wife and your two daughters who are here. Get out right now, or you will be swept away in the destruction of the city. When Lot still hesitated, the angel seized his hand and the hands of his wife and 2 daughters and rushed them to safety outside the city, for the Lord was merciful. When they were safely out of the city, one of the angels ordered, "Run for your lives and do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains or you will be swept away." So guess what happened? "Oh, no, my lord," Lot begged. "You have been so gracious to me and saved my life, and you have shown such great kindness. But I cannot go to the mountains. Disaster would catch up to me there, and I would soon pass away. See, there is a small village nearby. Please let me go there instead. Don't you see how small it is? Then my life will be saved." "All right," the angel said. "I will grant your request. I will not destroy the little village. But hurry, escape to it, for I can do nothing until you arrive there." This explains why that village was known as Zoar, which means little place. Lot reached the village just as the sun was rising over the horizon. Then the Lord rained down fire and burning sulfur from the sky on Sodom and Gomorrah. He utterly destroyed them, along with the other cities and villages of the plain, wiping out all the people and every bit of vegetation. But Lot's wife looked back as she was following behind him, and she turned into a pillar of salt. Now, the verb indicates prolonged, intense gazing toward the world that she loved, not just a curious, quick glance. So, what does that tell you? She was basically saying, "Man, those I had good times there," and she again, the verb indicates prolonged, intense gazing. She didn't just glance; she stayed there looking. Abraham got up early the next morning and hurried out to the place where he had stood in the Lord's presence. He looked out across the plain toward Sodom and Gomorrah and watched as columns of smoke rose from the cities like smoke from a furnace. But God had listened to Abraham's request and kept Lot safe, removing him from the disaster that engulfed the cities of the plain. So, what's going on here? Well, the 2 angels who visited Sodom observed evidence of the wickedness that had risen up to God as an outcry, right? Up until the moment of destruction, the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. That's from Genesis 13:13. Lot had chosen the fertile fields around Sodom for his financial advantage. That's in Genesis 13, verse 10 and 11. This required moving his family to Sodom and associating closely with his people. In time, he became a respected leader in the community, even becoming a judge who sat in the gate of Sodom. Genesis 19:1, we just read that. Giving his opinion on legal transactions. It seems that Lot said the right words, but his lifestyle proved that he was compromising with the wrong people. So what happened? God's angels came to confirm that the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah were as great as had been indicated, right? By the outcry that had reached God. Now, he knew with absolute certainty, of course, but he was demonstrating his justice. Now, this on site visit of the angel served only to confirm the evil in Sodom. The demands of the male citizens gave evidence of the wickedness that God knew was actually going on in Sodom. When the men of Sodom demanded that Lot release his guests to them for sensual relations, if you will, Lot showed the degree to which he had bought into thinking of his neighbors. He went outside. He didn't fear for himself. He went outside with them, closing the door behind him. So he knew them. While refusing to surrender his guests to their evil designs, he offered instead his 2 unmarried daughters for their evil designs. This compromise did not satisfy the men. They continued their rude demands, adding derision to Lot as an alien who was now daring to act as their judge. They began to threaten Lot himself. Lot lost credibility with his neighbors because he had compromised his spiritual values. Suddenly, what happened? Well, the angels opened the door. They reached out and pulled Lot back into the house, closing the door behind him. Then they caused the men to be blind so they could not even see or locate the door to break it down. Now, at this point, what we read, there's no turning back at this point. God's judgment was imminent. It was going to happen. The angels told Lot to round up his family members, his wife, daughters, sons-in-law, who were pledged to marry his daughters. Lot went to warn his sons-in-law of the impending judgment, and guess what happened? But they didn't hasten to join Lot in the family exodus. To his sons-in-law, Lot seemed to be joking. That's from verse 14. Long before this night, Lot had lost his credibility with the two men who were pledged to become members of his family. As a result, the two men perished with the other citizens of Sodom. Now, what happened next? Just at dawn, the two angels urged Lot to hurry out of the city, taking with him his wife and two daughters, and everybody else didn't want to go. They were in danger of being consumed in the punishment of the city. Now, if you recall, when Abraham approached the Lord and said, what if there's 50 people that are righteous? 45, 40, 30, 20, he went down to 10, right? It turns out that there was basically only, if anything, 4, if anything. And we're going to find out that we just found out that Abraham's wife was not really in that picture too much. So now we're down to 3, right? Lot and his 2 daughters. But check out what happens to Lot's daughters next, in the next few paragraphs. So while he lingered, the angels took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters, right? The Lord being merciful to him. And they brought him out and set him outside the city. That's in verse 16. Verse 16. Now, once out of the city, the angels issued warnings. Escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, or you will be destroyed. That's in verse 17. Now, instead of complying with the warning, however, Lot tried to negotiate, asking instead to be allowed to go as far as Zoar, which is a little village that was on the outskirts of the area, right? The angels gave their permission and left Lot. Now, by the time the family reached Zoar, the sun had risen. Then suddenly the Lord rained down brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah. It was a terrible destruction with burning flames and thick smoke ascending to the sky. Here's interesting. Lot's wife could not resist the urge to look back on it, which was exactly what the angels had said they must not do. When she looked back, she became a pillar of salt. Now, a little bit of scientific facts, not that it matters, but if you do a little bit of a research on the area, on the southeast part of the Dead Sea, right? You're going to notice that there are actually now deposits of sulfur, which is brimstone, and asphalt that have been found in the area. Possibly an earthquake occurred, lightning ignited the gases that were released, causing a rain of fire and smoke. Nobody really knows. Some people say it was even a volcano, but the fire came down from heaven. So now, Jesus is coming again. We do not know when this will be, but we know that it will happen, right? Jesus warned that in the days of Noah, people were carrying on life as usual when the flood came. That's from Genesis back in chapter 6. Then he added, likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built, but on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Now, even so, this is from Luke chapter 17, verse 28 through 36. Even so, it'll be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. In that day, he who is on the house step and his goods are in the house, let him not come down to take them away. And likewise, the one who is in the field, let him not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life will preserve it. I tell you, in that night there will be 2 men in one bed. The one will be taken, the other will be left. 2 women will be grinding together. The one will be taken, the other left. 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken, the other will be left. Again, that's from Luke chapter 17, verse 28 through 36. Hold on, let me see. Anything else? Let's continue. All right. Afterward, Lot left Zoar. Why do you think he left? Lot left Zoar because he was afraid of the people there, and he went to live in a cave in the mountains with his two daughters. You can imagine that the people, even though it's a small village, the people in Zoar didn't really want to have Lot around. They probably thought he was bad news. Okay, so it's just something to note that even though Lot went to Zoar, a little village with his two daughters, they didn't want him there. He was afraid of the people there. He went to live in a cave in the mountains with his two daughters. One day, the older daughter said to her sister, "There are no men left anywhere in this entire area, so we cannot get married like everyone else, and our father will soon be too old to have children. Come, let's get him drunk with wine, and then we will have relations with him. That way, we will preserve a family line through our father." So that night, they got him drunk with wine, and the older daughter went in and had relations with her father. He was unaware of her lying down or getting up again. The next morning, the older daughter said to her younger sister, "I had relations with our father last night. Let's get him drunk with wine again tonight, and you go in and have relations with him. That way, we will preserve our family line through our father." So that night, they got him drunk with wine again, and the younger daughter went in and had relations. They had relations with him as before. He was unaware of her lying down or getting up again. As a result, both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their own father. When the older daughter gave birth to a son, she named him Moab. He became the ancestor of the nation known as the Moabites. When the younger daughter gave birth, she named him Ben-Ami, and he became the ancestor of the nation now known as the Ammonites. If you notice, the Moabites and the Ammonites became very, very big rivals of Israel later on in life. Now, something else to note here. It's always the little things that you got to look at. Lot's daughters have been corrupted by Sodom's culture. They had no qualms over what they did, which is really, really, really tragic. Now, just before Lot had left Ur with his uncle Abram, the potential of being under the covenant blessing had been his. And he had prospered, right? He gathered a lot of property when he was in Egypt with Abram and Sarai. But he chose to leave all that when he decided to move to the lush area of the Jordan Valley. He was not completely happy in Sodom. We know that he was tormented by the filthy lives of lawless men. Though he kept living among them, his righteous soul was tormented. He ran for his life from Sodom to the little town of Zoar, but was afraid to stay there. At the end of his life story, we see him living in a mountain cave with his daughters, lying senseless. The daughters, thinking they were the sole survivors of their people, seduced Lot so that their families could continue. The descendants of their sons, Moab and Ben-Ami, became the Moabites and the Ammonites, people who became enemies of the descendants of Abraham. Now, here's a gradual step of what happened, okay? You can call it Lot's biography, in a series of steps downward. They're all tragic, actually. First of all, he left Ur in Haran, right, with his uncle Abram to travel to an unknown destination. We go back to Genesis 12, verse 1 through 5 for that. Then, I have all the notes here. Then, when given an opportunity to choose the grazing area for his herds, he selfishly chose the fertile valley near Sodom. That's in Genesis 13, verse 1 through 11. Then, he pitched his tent on the outskirts of Sodom. That's Genesis 13, verse 12 and 13. Then, in beginning of chapter 19, he fits into the new community so well that he became a leader, even a judge who sat at the gate to give judgments on issues. Then in verse 4 and 5 of 19, we read that because he fits so well in the community, the men of Sodom did not hesitate to demand that he release his two guests for their sensual pleasure. In verse 6 through 8 of 19, we read that not wanting to give his guests to the townsmen's disgusting designs, he offered them instead his two virgin daughters. Not good. Then in verse 12 through 14 of this chapter, he tried to get his sons-in-law to escape the destruction of Sodom with his wife and daughters, and they thought he was only joking. Then in verse 16 and 17, angels dragged them out of Sodom and told them to run to the mountains for safety. In verse 18 through 22, Lot negotiated with the angels, seeking approval to stay closer to Sodom. He still didn't want to let go of that area. Verse 30, Lot was afraid, so he hid in a cave with his daughters. Verse 13 through 36, Lot's daughters got him drunk and used him to impregnate themselves. And then 37 through 38, the sons of the daughters became the Moabites and the Ammonites, which were enemies of Abraham's descendants. So where do you think Lot would lose his dignity and faith? Not in big earth-shaking decisions, but in making numerous small choices that left God out of his life. I've always told you in the past that the enemy works in increments and little baby steps, so you don't notice that he's working in your life in a bad way. In a bad way, of course. Now, we're going to go to chapter 20 now. Abraham deceives Abimelech once again, just like what happened in Egypt. While we may show our heroes in only a positive light, God tells the truth about their weaknesses and lapses. Abraham knew God to be the judge of all the earth, who does only what is right? Yet we see Abraham in a lapse of faith again, lying about Sarah in order to save his life. Abraham left Mamre instead of Gerar, a town in Gerar, a Philistine city. Abimelech, the king of Gerar, took Sarah into his household, believing that she was Abraham's unmarried sister. We then see God's mercy as he intervenes and protects all parties. Abraham was afraid that the godless king would destroy him in order to take Sarah, but the king showed respect for God and sent Abram away. Fear can be a brave person. Fear can turn a brave person into a coward. Abraham discovered this when he moved to Gerar. Fearing for his life, he told a lie and immediately put Sarah in jeopardy. Let's read about this real quick here. Let me see. Okay. Abraham moved south to the Negev and lived for a while between Kadesh and Shur. And then he moved on to Gerar. While living there as a foreigner, Abraham introduced his wife, Sarah, by saying, "She's my sister." So King Abimelech of Gerar sent for Sarah and had her brought to him at his palace. But that night, God came to Abimelech in a dream and told him, "You are a dead man, for that woman you have taken is already married." But Abimelech had not slept with her yet. So he said, "Lord, will he destroy an innocent nation? Didn't Abraham tell me she is my sister?" And she herself said, "Yes, he's my brother. I acted in complete innocence. My hands are clean." In the dream, God responded, "Yes, I know you are innocent. That's why I kept you from sinning against me, and why I did not let you touch her. Now, return the woman to her husband, and he will pray for you, for he is a prophet. Then you will live, but if you do not return her to him, you can be sure that you and all your people will pass away." Now, this thing about verse 7, okay, prophet. Now, not that Abraham might predict the future. That's what some people think a prophet is. No, but so that he might pray for Abimelech. This is the first time it's mentioned directly in the Bible. It shows that prophecy is not primarily prediction, but rather speaking the words of God as inspired by him. Just a couple of little notes there. All right, let's continue here. Hold on a second, please. Abimelech got up early the next morning and quickly called all his servants together. When he told them what had happened, his men were terrified. Then Abimelech called for Abraham. "What have you done to us?" he demanded. "What crime have I committed that deserves treatment like this, making me and my kingdom guilty of this great sin? No one should ever do what you have done. Whatever possessed you to do such a thing?" Abraham replied, "I thought this was a godless place. They will want my wife and will destroy me to get her. and she really is my sister, for we both have the same father, but different mothers. And I married her. When God called me to leave my father's home and to travel from place to place, I told her, do me a favor, wherever we go, tell people that I am your brother. So, at this point, a couple of notes here. Sodom and Gomorrah had been destroyed, right? Abraham had not heard from Lot and did not know he had been saved. Perhaps the view from Abraham's tent was a painful reminder of his lost nephew. So he decided to move from Mamre, where he had lived for 20 years, or as some suggest, there may have been another famine impending in that part of the land. Nobody really knows. But he came to Gerar, which was a Philistine city ruled by a powerful king, Abimelech. His name means, my father is king, and was an inherited title rather than his personal name. Now, on arriving, Abraham and Sarah introduced themselves as brother and sister, a practice that they had agreed to follow. We read that right in verse 13. Abraham was afraid that if the king knew Sarah was his wife, he would destroy Abraham in order to marry Sarah. Even though Sarah was almost 90 years old, the king took her into his household. Abraham's fear of the king led to his lapse of faith. Now, one night, Abimelech had a dream in which God spoke to him. Indeed, you are a dead man because of the woman you have taken, for she is a man's wife. That's in verse 3. Abimelech was stunned at the news and was very frightened. Now, thankful that he had not gone near Sarah, he asked God, will you slay a righteous nation also? Did he not say to me, she's my sister? And she herself said, he's my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocence of my hands, I have done this. That's from verse 4 and 5. Now God replied in verse 6 through 7, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart, but I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her, right? Now, therefore, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you will surely pass away, you and all of yours. Now, wisely, I would think, Abimelech took his dream very seriously. Remember that Abraham thought that the nation was a godless nation? And maybe Abimelech, who knows, maybe Abimelech did worship other gods, but here he found out that it was really the one true God who talked to him. Now, rising early, he called in all his officials. When he related to them all that had occurred, they were very much afraid. That's from verse 8. Abimelech summoned Abraham to a meeting in which he confronted him with his wrongdoing. What have you done to us? He asked accusingly. From verse 9 and 10, have I offended you, that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You've done deeds to me that ought not to be done. He then went beyond accusing and demanding the answer. What did you have in view when you have done such a thing? I'm using different translations to, show different differences here, minor differences. Abraham gave two excuses in his description. First, he feared for his life, right? Because he viewed the people of Gerar as not fearing God. Second, he said that Sarah was really his half-sister, so he had not told a complete lie. Abraham did not trust God to take care of him if he told the truth. Interesting. Now, Abraham had been scolded for this sin once before when he was in Egypt, remember? That was in chapter 12. Even a person who has a long-standing trust in God can fall into the same sin for which he has previously repented. That does happen. That does happen. Okay, now let's continue here. Let me see if I have any more notes here. No, okay. Not for now. Not for now. Let's continue for the rest of this chapter. Tell Abimelech. Then Abimelech took some of his sheep and goats, cattle, and male and female servants, and he presented them to Abraham. So here we have also, once again, just like in Egypt, the Pharaoh gave Abraham a lot of stuff, right? Here, Abimelech gives Abraham a lot of stuff, animals, servants, everything. He also returned his wife Sarah to him. Then Abimelech said, look over my land and choose any place to live. And he said to Sarah, "Look, I'm giving your brother 1,000 pieces of silver in the presence of all these witnesses. This is to compensate you for any wrong I may have done to you. This will settle any claim against me, and your reputation is cleared." Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants, so they could have children again. For the Lord had caused all the women to be infertile because of what happened with Abraham's wife Sarah. Interesting situation here, right? Abimelech wanted to make things right with Abraham and his God. He gave him sheep, cattle, slaves to Abraham. He returned Sarah. He offered Abraham permission to live wherever he wished for in the land. And he told Sarah that he was giving her quote-unquote brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Now, for his part, Abraham prayed to God, and the Lord healed Abimelech and all his household. To protect Sarah, God had closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech. That's from verse 18. Now, so question, who was the better man? Abraham, the father of our faith, or a Philistine king? We have an amazing revelation of character in Genesis chapter 20. Abraham had been chosen by God to be the conduit of blessing to the whole world, right? He had been privileged to have conversations with God and had received promises from God that no one else had received. He felt that in going to the Philistine city of Gerar, he would be mingling with people who had no fear of God. That was his excuse for lying about Sarah. He certainly stumbled in his walk of faith and caused God's judgment to come on Abimelech and his people. Still, God called Abraham his prophet, no matter what, and he answered Abraham's prayer for judgment to be lifted. In other words, saving Abimelech's life and removing the barrenness of all of Abimelech's household. Now, a little bit more about Abimelech. Abimelech, on the other hand, recognized that God was speaking to him through his dream. Verse 3 through 7. He also understood that to take another man's wife would be wrong and would make him guilty before God. He, the pagan king, confronted Abraham with his lie and then took steps to be relieved of his guilt. In offering Abraham a generous compensation, Abimelech acknowledged his wrongdoing, though in his reference to Sarah's brother, he seemed to be insisting upon his innocence. Now, about God's protection. Through his lack of faith, Abraham was prepared to jeopardize God's covenant promises to him. God was not caught off guard, though. He protected Sarah by keeping Abimelech from her and by informing the king through a dream of the lies that both Abraham and Sarah had told him. Abraham stumbled when he relied on his own problem-solving skills, while he should have trusted the Lord for protection, right? God promised to give wisdom to all who ask for it. That's from actually James chapter 1, verse 5. You ask for wisdom, God will give it to you. So, pretty good. Let's continue on. We can go to the beginning of the next chapter. That's pretty good. Now, okay, the birth of Isaac. The birth of Isaac. Let's see. Hold on a second, please. Let me see. Oh, yeah, a couple of preview notes I have here on chapter 21 before we get started. Life on planet Earth has had its ups and downs, its pleasures and its frustrations. This is going to be illustrated in this chapter 21. Sarah giving birth to Isaac was a tremendous high. God had kept his promise. As Abraham held little Isaac in his arms, he must have laughed with joy, actually. His years, 25 years basically, of waiting were over. It would seem that joy would pervade the lives of Abraham and Sarah forever, right? Then a cloud settled over the household when during a great feast celebrating Isaac's winning, Sarah watched Ishmael mock her son. Furious, she insisted that Abraham banish Hagar and Ishmael from the household for good. This, of course, caused great grief to Abraham because of his love for Ishmael. Family problems needed to be set aside when a difficulty arose with Abraham's Philistine neighbors. Having observed Abraham's prosperity and strength, Abimelech arrived to ask for a treaty. Abraham settled a controversy over water rights, and life with the neighbors went on peacefully. We're going to read about that right now. So let's see what happens here. The Lord, let me see something. Just want to make sure. Okay. The Lord kept his word, and he did for Sarah exactly what he had promised. She became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son for Abraham in his old age. This happened at just the time God said it would. And Abraham named their son Isaac. 8 days after Isaac was born, Abraham circumcises him as God had commanded. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. Now, Isaac was born 25 years after the promise was first given. Keep that in mind. So Abraham and Sarah waited about 25 years. And Sarah declared, God has brought me laughter. All who hear about this will laugh with me. Isaac means he laughs, by the way. The definition of Isaac is he laughs. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse a baby? Yet I had given Abraham a son in his old age. When Isaac grew up and was about to be weaned, Abraham prepared a huge feast to celebrate the occasion. But guess what happened? But Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of Abraham, and her Egyptian servant Hagar, making fun of her son Isaac. So she turned to Abraham and demanded, get rid of that slave woman and her son. He is not going to share the inheritance with my son Isaac. I will not have it. Now, people wonder, when did this happen? Well, you figure this out probably occurred when Isaac was about 2-3 years of age. That means that Ishmael was about 16, 17 years of age by this time when this happened. Let's continue. This upset Abraham very much because Ishmael was his son. But God told Abraham, do not be upset over the boy and your servant. Do whatever Sarah tells you, for Isaac is a son through whom your descendants will be counted. But I will also make a nation of the descendants of Hagar's son, because he is your son too. So Abraham got up early the next morning, prepared food and a container of water, and strapped them on Hagar's shoulders. Then he sent her away with their son, and she wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water was gone, actually, let me have some notes about this before we go any further. Now, let me see here. Yeah, before we go any further. God was very much involved in the birth of Isaac. He was gracious to Sarah, enabling her to become pregnant. So, as he had promised long before, he scheduled Isaac's birth precisely at the time he had predicted, right? A year before, when God had told Sarah that she would have a son, she had laughed silently with unbelief. Now, after years of waiting, hoping, and longing, it seemed impossible that she could ever have the son that God had promised. That's chapter 18, verse 9 through 15. Now she laughed aloud with purest joy. She said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. Who would ever have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age. That's verse 6 through 7. The word translated visited has also been translated gracious. God was gracious in enabling Sarah to become pregnant. The same word is used in connection with Hannah becoming pregnant with Samuel. We're going to read that about in 1 Samuel. And many years later, Elizabeth became pregnant with John the Baptist. That's in Luke chapter 1, verse 13 and verse 24. So what happened with Hagar and Ishmael for now? It seemed the laughter that had filled Abraham's household would go on forever. Isaac had brought so much joy to them all, but one day the laughter was choked in Sarah's throat. She lost her joy and immediately took steps to remove the source of her unhappiness. Abraham and Sarah celebrated with a feast when Isaac was weaned. So he was about 2-3 years old. Family members, servants, neighbors were probably in attendance, right? The happy event was marred, though. It was ruined, however, when Sarah observed Ishmael mocking Isaac. In the New Testament, Galatians chapter 4, verse 28 to 31, Paul refers to Ishmael persecuting Isaac. Keep that in mind. In ancient times, a child was not weaned until he was 2 or 3 years old. When this important stage was reached in the child's development, the father would host a celebration. Now, during the process of weaning, a child would cry for his mother's milk and express distaste for the substitute nourishment. The psalm writer in Psalms 131, right, it referred to this when he wrote about the way he had calmed and quieted his soul before the Lord, like a weaned child with his mother. That's Psalms 131, verse 2. Let's see. I want to make sure I don't miss or skip anything. Now, so what we just read right now, what we read is kind of important because let's talk a little bit about Hagar and Ishmael. First of all, Sarah was extremely upset to see Ishmael, who was now a teenager, testing Isaac. She now saw his very presence in the camp as a threat to Isaac. There could be no mistaking her decisiveness as she demanded that Abraham cast out his servant and her son. She wanted to be sure that Ishmael did not receive any portion of the inheritance that was rightfully Isaac's, right? Abraham was in anguish because he loved his son Ishmael. You would figure that much, right? How could he send him away? But God spoke to him, telling him not to be distressed, but to listen to what Sarah was saying. The promise of God were to come through Isaac, not through Ishmael. However, since Ishmael was Abraham's son, God would make a nation of them as well, but not the main nation. Early the next morning, Abraham sent Hagar and Ishmael away, giving them food and water for the journey, right? It's kind of ironic that, keep note, that he didn't give them anything else as far as animals or any kind of inheritance, just a goodbye pack, basically. So they went to the desert. When they could no longer go on, Hagar put Ishmael under the shade of a bush. She seated herself a little distance, unable to bring herself to watch her son pass away. They both wept. Hagar cried in total despair. Ishmael cried out to God, and he heard the boy. So let's see what happens here real quick. When the water was gone, she put the boy in the shade of a bush. Then she went and sat down by herself about 100 yards away. I don't want to watch the boy pass away, she said, as she burst into tears. But God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, Hagar, what is wrong? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Go to him and comfort him, for I will make a great nation from his descendants. Then God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well full of water. She quickly filled her water container and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy as he grew up in the wilderness. He became a skillful archer, and he settled in the wilderness of Paran. His mother arranged for him to marry a woman from the land of Egypt. Now, let me read you some notes about this, and then we'll be done. God sent his angel to speak with Hagar, right? What was troubling you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Arise, lift up the boy, and hold him with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Verse 17 through 18. The angel's instructions, though, must have seemed like a mockery to Hagar. It would be cruel to expect the boy to move in his condition, right? Cruel until God opened Hagar's eyes. A well of water was close by. She hurried to fill the water skin and give Ishmael a life-saving drink. God was with Ishmael as he matured. He lived in the desert, becoming an archer, and married a woman from Egypt. Now, let me see here. I think I have a couple more things. No, I think we're done for right now. Yes, we're done for right now. Okay. Good. Good. Let me see something here. Yeah, I think actually, let me read you the rest of the chapter. Yeah, let's finish it up. It's okay. It's okay. About this time, Abimelech came with Phicol, his army commander, to visit Abraham. God is obviously with you, helping you in everything you do, Abimelech said. Swear to me in God's name that you will never deceive me, my children, or any of my descendants. I have been loyal to you, so now swear that you will be loyal to me and to this country where you are now living as a foreigner. Abraham replied, Yes, I swear to it. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well that Abimelech's servants had taken by force from Abraham's servants. Now, this is the first I've heard of it, Abimelech answered. I have no idea who is responsible. You've never complained about this before. Abraham then gave some of his sheep, goats, and cattle to Abimelech, and they made a treaty. But Abraham also took 7 additional female lambs and set them up by themselves. Abimelech asked, Why have you set these 7 apart from the others?
Rudy, here is your reminder. Daily reminder.
Alexa, stop. Why have you set these 7 apart from the others? Abraham replied, Please accept these 7 lambs to show your agreement that I dug this well. Then he named the place Beersheba, which means well of the oath, because I was where they had sworn the oath. After making their covenant at Beersheba, Abimelech left with Phicol, the commander of his army, and they returned home to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and there he worshipped the Lord, the eternal God, and Abraham lived as a foreigner in Philistine country for a long time. I have to mention a couple of things here. First, you notice the little details. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree. Tamarisk tree. Tamarisk trees, if you do any research, required lots of water. Lots of water, more than other plants. This act indicates Abraham's security in his land rights and his faith that God will provide water in this desert area. Just a little minor thing that I want you guys to notice. And we're done. Now we're